The dig team arrived at the abandoned space station on a Tuesday. Dr. Sam Powell checked his oxygen levels one last time before stepping through the airlock. The structure had been floating at the edge of the Arcturus system for who knew how long, silent and mysterious. "Are you getting anything, Liz?" Sam asked over the comm. Elizabeth Reeves adjusted her scanner, frowning at the readings. "Nothing makes sense. The metal composition is unlike anything in our database. It's ancient, but the decay rate is impossibly slow." Behind them, Zartek chittered with amusement. The tall, insectoid alien's translator converted his sounds to words. Another human-made relic, no doubt. Primitive but charming in its simplicity. Sam ignored the comment. The Procyon representatives always looked down on human achievements. It didn't matter. They were here to document and catalog, not to impress anyone. "Fan out," Sam ordered. Standard archaeological protocol. The team spread through the dark corridors, their helmet lights cutting through decades of dust. This wasn't just any find. The station appeared to be military, with locked compartments and sealed doors that hadn't been opened in centuries. "Dr. Powell, you should see this," radioed Jack Nelson, their engineering specialist. "I'm in what looks like a navigation room." Sam followed the signal marker to a large circular chamber. The walls were lined with dead consoles and view screens. Jack stood at the center, where a raised platform held what must have been the captain's chair. "Look at these markings," Jack said, pointing to symbols etched into the armrests. Sam bent down, wiping away the dust. "English. Old English. Maybe 26th century. "Impossible," said Zartek, who had followed them in. "Humans barely had interstellar capability then. This station is at least 2,000 years old." And yet, Sam traced the letters with his finger, feeling something stir inside him. "That's definitely our language." The team spent hours documenting the chamber. Liz discovered a sealed door at the back, which took their combined efforts to pry open. It led to a narrow passage and another chamber beyond. "Oh my God," whispered Sam as they entered. Before them stretched a massive window revealing not stars, but ships, dozens of them. No, hundreds, floating in perfect formation. The vessels were unlike modern starships, bulkier, with odd geometric shapes and visible weapon mounts. "A fleet," said Jack, pressing his helmet against the glass. "A mothball fleet." Zartek scoffed. "Primitive vessels. Look at those propulsion systems, highly inefficient. And those weapon mounts. They'd barely dent a modern shield." But Sam wasn't listening. He approached a control panel beneath the window, drawn by the familiar symbols. They were everywhere, on the consoles, the walls, even etched into what looked like plaques commemorating battles or missions. "Human writing," he said softly. "All of it." "Impossible," repeated Zartek. "Your species couldn't have built this. You were barely space-capable when this was constructed." Liz joined Sam at the console. "Official history might be wrong," she suggested. "It wouldn't be the first time." Sam brushed dust from the main console. Beneath was a simple panel with a handprint outline. Acting on instinct, he placed his palm on it. Nothing happened for a moment. Then, with a groan of ancient machinery coming to life, lights flickered on throughout the chamber. The console hummed, and holographic displays sputtered into existence. "What did you do?" demanded Zartek. "I don't know," Sam replied truthfully. "But I think." He was interrupted by a mechanical voice that filled the chamber, speaking in an old dialect of English that his translator struggled with. "DNA recognition confirmed. Human operator detected. Initiating revival protocol Alpha. Awakening fleet command." Through the window, they watched in amazement as lights began to appear on the ships, one after another, like stars being born in the void. "Well," said Sam, feeling a mix of terror and wonder, "I think we just woke something up." Sam stepped back from the console as the room hummed with energy. The ships outside the window continued to light up in sequence, power systems awakening after what must have been centuries of dormancy. "We need to report this," Liz said, her voice unsteady. "The galactic unity needs to know what we found." "Not yet," Sam replied, watching the fleet come alive. "Let's understand what we're dealing with first." A soft blue light began to gather in the center of the room, pixels of illumination forming into a human shape. Within seconds, a woman stood before them, or rather, the holographic projection of one. She wore a uniform unlike anything in modern military catalogs, with insignia Sam didn't recognize. Her hair was cut short, her expression stern but not unkind. "I am Captain Kate Sullivan, commanding officer of the 7th Defense Fleet," the hologram said. "Identity confirmed. Human genetic marker. Situation report requested." The archaeological team stared in shock. Zartek was the first to recover. "This is preposterous," the insectoid scientist chittered. "Some kind of ancient recording triggered by the human's touch." The hologram turned to face Zartek directly. "I assure you, I am not a recording. My consciousness was preserved using quantum imprinting technology. I am as aware as you are, representative of the Procyon collective." Zartek stepped back in surprise. "How did you?" "Your species' physiological characteristics are in my database," Captain Sullivan said. "Now, who is in charge here?" "I am," Sam said, stepping forward. "Dr. Sam Powell, Archaeological Expedition Alpha 9, Galactic Unity Science Division." Sullivan's expression changed slightly. "Galactic Unity. That's new. What year is it, Dr. Powell?" "It's 3472 by Old Earth calendar." The hologram was silent for a moment, processing. 2037 years since my consciousness was uploaded. Longer than expected." She looked around at the team. "You found us by accident, I presume." "We were mapping abandoned structures in this sector," Sam explained. "Nobody knew this fleet existed. Captain, the historical records show nothing about humans having this level of technology in your era." Sullivan smiled. "History is written by those who survive, Dr. Powell, and those who wish to be remembered." She gestured to the fleet outside. "What you see here was humanity's greatest achievement and its best-kept secret. But why hide it?" Liz asked. "Why keep this fleet a secret for so long?" "Because it was built for one purpose," Sullivan replied. "To face an enemy we knew would return someday. The Void Swarm." Zartek made a dismissive sound. "The Void Swarm is a myth, a story to frighten children." "I assure you," Sullivan said coldly, "they are very real. I fought them. We drove them back at terrible cost. But we knew they would return. That's why this fleet was hidden here, waiting to be awakened when needed." As if responding to her words, alarms suddenly blared throughout the station. The hologram's expression turned grave as she waved a hand, bringing up a tactical display. "It seems we've awakened just in time," Sullivan said. "Long-range sensors are detecting swarm signatures at the edge of this sector." "That's impossible," Jack said. "Our modern sensors would have detected any approaching threat." "Your modern sensors aren't calibrated to detect them," Sullivan replied. "The swarm adapts, changes. We've been monitoring them, even in dormancy." Sam felt a chill run down his spine. "How long do we have?" "Weeks, perhaps a month," Sullivan said. "The fleet will need that time to fully activate and prepare." "I still don't believe this," Zartek said. "These ancient human vessels couldn't possibly stand against any modern threat." Sullivan smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You might be surprised what humans can build when faced with extinction. After all, we're still here, aren't we?" Outside the window, the ancient fleet continued to awaken, weapon systems powering up one by one. Sam paced the command deck as Captain Sullivan's hologram manipulated the controls. 3 days had passed since they awakened the fleet. Outside, the massive ships now hummed with power, their ancient engines glowing with blue light. "The Galactic Unity Council is demanding answers," Liz said, entering the room with a worried expression. "They've sent 3 diplomatic vessels to investigate why we've gone silent." "Let them come," Sullivan replied without looking up. "They'll understand soon enough." Sam stopped pacing. They think we've discovered some valuable artifact and are keeping it for ourselves. They don't understand the danger. Few ever do until it's too late, Sullivan said. Her holographic hands moved through the air, bringing up displays showing the edge of the sector. The swarm advances faster than I predicted. We now have perhaps 2 weeks, not 4. Jack entered the command deck, his face showing both exhaustion and excitement. Captain, we've managed to activate the weapons systems on the flagship and 3 support vessels. The technology it's beyond anything I've ever seen. Of course it is, Zartek said, his tone still skeptical despite everything he'd witnessed. The human claims these ships are designed to fight mythical space monsters. Sullivan's image flickered as she turned to face the insectoid scientist. Perhaps a demonstration would help convince you. She gestured, and the main view screen activated, showing a recording. The footage showed Earth, but not as Sam had ever seen it in historical records. The blue planet was surrounded by ships, hundreds of them, fighting against dark shapes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. As they watched, one of these dark shapes extended tendrils that wrapped around a human vessel, crushing it. The first swarm war, Sullivan explained. 2435. They came without warning. We lost 30 million people in the first day. The footage showed more battles, Earth's atmosphere burning in places, then human ships deploying weapons unlike anything in the modern arsenal, beams that somehow cut through the darkness of the swarm entities. Quantum displacement technology, Sullivan said, noting their expressions. It shifts matter between dimensional planes. The only effective weapon against their biology. If this is true, Sam said slowly, why isn't this in our history? Why doesn't everyone know? Because we chose to be forgotten, Sullivan replied simply. After the war, humanity realized something important. The swarm was drawn to our technology, our civilization. So we made a decision. The majority of humans would return to Earth and other colonies, abandoning advanced technology, living simple lives that wouldn't attract attention. A select few would maintain this fleet in secret, waiting for the swarm's return. Liz struggled to find words. That's impossible. An entire civilization choosing to regress. Is it? Sullivan asked. Is it harder to believe than a species facing extinction? We did what was necessary. We hid our light from the darkness. An alarm suddenly blared. Jack rushed to a console. Multiple ships approaching. Galactic Unity vessels. And something else, Sullivan said, voice tightening. Look at the long-range sensors. On another screen, at the very edge of sensor range, dark shapes moved against the stars. Not ships, something organic, flowing like liquid through space. They're coming faster than expected, Sullivan said. The activation of the fleet must have drawn their attention. The Unity ships entered visual range, sleek, modern vessels with the blue and gold insignia of the central government. They've sent Vice Admiral Greg Wallace himself, Liz said, recognizing the flagship. Good, Sullivan replied. We'll need someone with authority when they see what's coming. They won't believe us, Sam said, not until they see the swarm themselves. Sullivan's hologram turned to him, her expression grim. By then, it may be too late. We need to convince them now, while there's still time to prepare. She straightened, adjusting her virtual uniform. Dr. Powell, please open a channel to the Admiral's vessel. It's time humanity remembered who they once were. Outside, the ancient fleet began moving into defensive formation, guided by systems designed millennia ago for this exact moment. Vice Admiral Wallace's face filled the view screen, his expression hard as stone. His uniform bore the impressive insignia of the Galactic Unity's highest military rank. Behind him stood representatives from 3 major galactic species. Dr. Powell, Wallace said coldly, you have exactly 1 minute to explain why you've activated unknown military hardware without authorization. Sam glanced at Sullivan's hologram, who nodded slightly. Admiral, we've discovered an ancient human defense fleet, created to combat a threat called the Void Swarm, according to Captain Sullivan. Captain who? Wallace interrupted. Sullivan's hologram stepped forward. I am Captain Kate Sullivan, former commander of Earth's 7th Defense Fleet. My consciousness was preserved to guide this fleet when the swarm returned. A Meridian scientist behind Wallace made a sound of disbelief. Primitive AI simulation at best. Humans never possessed such technology. We kept many secrets, Sullivan replied calmly. Admiral, scan the edge of the Kappa sector. You'll detect unusual energy patterns that your sensors might classify as background radiation. They're not. They're swarm scouts. Wallace frowned but nodded to someone off-screen. We're checking now. Dr. Powell, do you understand the severity of your actions? Activating unknown military technology could save billions of lives, Sam interrupted. Admiral, I've seen the historical records. The swarm destroyed half of Earth in 2435 before they were driven back. There's nothing in our history about this swarm, Wallace said. Because we erased it, Sullivan said simply. Humanity chose to hide its technology, to appear primitive and uninteresting to the swarm. We scattered across the stars, many of us abandoning our identity as humans, integrating into other civilizations. Wallace was about to respond when a junior officer rushed to his side, whispering urgently. The Admiral's expression changed from skepticism to concern. We're detecting something, he admitted. But whatever these readings are, our modern defenses can handle them. Sullivan shook her head. Your weapons will pass right through them. The swarm exists partially in another dimension. Only quantum displacement technology can harm them. Like the weapons on these ships, Sam added. Admiral, you need to alert the Council. Begin evacuation of the border systems. Wallace seemed to be wavering. Even if what you say is true, this fleet is ancient. Surely our modern vessels would be torn apart in seconds, Sullivan finished for him. Admiral, I lost my physical body fighting these creatures. I watched them consume my crew. Please don't make the same mistake we did by underestimating them. Liz stepped forward. Admiral, I've been analyzing the data from Captain Sullivan. The quantum signatures match anomalies our scientists have detected near dead star systems in the outer rim. Systems that went silent over the past 50 years. This seemed to reach Wallace. The Helios cluster, he said quietly. We thought it was a natural phenomenon. It was the swarm, Sullivan confirmed. Feeding, growing stronger, preparing for a full invasion. Wallace was silent for a long moment. I need to consult with the Council. In the meantime, do not move this fleet. The transmission ended. He doesn't fully believe us, Sam said. No, Sullivan agreed. But he's concerned enough to report what we've told him. It's a start. Jack rushed into the command center. Captain, we've managed to activate the main weapons array on 5 more vessels. The engine signatures are stabilizing. Sullivan nodded. Good work. We'll need every ship combat-ready within a week. Captain, Sam said hesitantly, you mentioned humans scattered across the galaxy, hiding their identity. Does that mean? Sullivan turned to him, her holographic eyes studying his face. Yes, Dr. Powell. Many species you consider alien may have human ancestry, including some in this room. Zartek, who had been silent, suddenly made a clicking sound. Impossible. Sullivan smiled. Is it? Have you never wondered why so many species share similar genetic markers, similar brain patterns? She looked at each of them. The swarm nearly destroyed us. In response, humanity didn't just hide its technology, it hid itself. Some through genetic modification, some through integration with other species. You're saying I might be. Sam couldn't finish the thought. Human. Sullivan completed. At least partly. Many are, without knowing it. And soon, you'll all need to remember what that means. Outside, the ancient fleet continued powering up, preparing for a war most of the galaxy had forgotten. 7 days passed since the meeting with Admiral Wallace. The command center of the ancient fleet buzzed with activity. Technicians from the Galactic Unity worked alongside the archaeological team, bringing systems online that had slept for millennia. Sam stood beside Sullivan's hologram, watching the tactical display. The Void Swarm had accelerated, consuming 2 unmanned research outposts at the edge of Unity space. "The Council finally believes us," Sam said, "but they're still arguing about the response." Sullivan nodded grimly. Politicians never change, regardless of species or century. Admiral Wallace entered the command center, looking like he hadn't slept in days. Behind him walked representatives from 12 galactic species. "Captain Sullivan," Wallace said, "the Unity Defense Council has voted. They've granted you provisional command of this fleet." "About time," Jack muttered from his console. Wallace continued as if he hadn't heard. "Our scientists have verified your claims about the swarm's composition. Conventional weapons pass right through them. Then they'll support our plan?" Sullivan asked. Wallace looked uncomfortable. "Not exactly. They believe we should retreat, abandon the outer systems, and establish a defensive line closer to the core worlds." "Abandoning billions to die," Sullivan said flatly. "The Council believes sacrifices may be necessary." Sam slammed his hand on the console. "We can't just surrender entire systems." Sullivan's hologram raised a hand. "Dr. Powell, Admiral, this fleet wasn't designed for retreat. The 7th Fleet carries the most powerful weapons ever created by human hands. We don't need to run." "What exactly can these ships do?" asked a Tellurian representative, her scaled skin reflecting the blue light of Sullivan's form. In response, Sullivan brought up a new display. It showed detailed schematics of the flagship. "The primary weapon is what we call the dimensional fold cannon. It creates a localized rupture in spacetime, forcing the swarm entities fully into our dimension, where they become vulnerable to conventional attacks." "And you're certain it works?" Wallace asked. "I used it to end the first swarm war," Sullivan said quietly. "At great cost." Liz, who had been analyzing data at a nearby station, joined them. "We've recovered more historical records from the fleet database. After the war, humans developed this technology further, creating weapons that could target the swarm's central consciousness. Their hive mind," Sullivan confirmed. "Cut off from it, individual swarm entities become disoriented, vulnerable." "How many ships are operational?" Wallace asked. Jack answered from his station. 73 vessels combat-ready, Admiral. Another 42 at 80% capacity." "Not enough," Sullivan said, shaking her holographic head. "We need at least 200 to implement the Prometheus protocol." "What's that?" Sam asked. "Our final strategy," Sullivan explained. "Using the fleet to create a dimensional barrier around the swarm's advance force, then collapsing it." Wallace studied the tactical display. "The Unity can provide support vessels. Not with your quantum weapons, but we have ships." "It's a start," Sullivan said. "But we need more than ships. We need pilots who understand this technology." The Tellurian representative stepped forward. "My people have legends, stories of ancestors who could touch the void between stars. Perhaps these aren't just stories." Sullivan looked at her with sudden interest. "Genetic memory. Yes, that would be consistent with our plan. The knowledge may still exist, buried in your DNA." "You're suggesting we recruit based on fairy tales?" Wallace asked incredulously. "I'm suggesting," Sullivan said patiently, "that the human legacy is more widespread than you realize. The knowledge to fight the swarm was preserved not just in this fleet, but in the descendants of those who scattered across the stars." Sam watched the various representatives, seeing uncertainty in their eyes, but also something else. Recognition, perhaps, or memory stirring after centuries of dormancy. "We have 10 days before the swarm reaches populated systems," Sullivan continued. 10 days to awaken what was hidden, to remember who you truly are." She turned to Sam. "Dr. Powell, I need you to broadcast a message to every world in the Unity. a specific frequency that will resonate with certain genetic markers. You want to call them home, Sam said, understanding. The descendants of your crew. Sullivan nodded, her holographic eyes bright with determination. It's time for humanity to remember its purpose, and for the galaxy to remember who really built its foundations. The stars disappeared one by one as the void swarm approached. Not consumed, simply vanished from sight as the creatures absorbed all light around them. From the bridge of the ancient flagship, Sam watched the tactical display with a sick feeling in his stomach. 3 weeks had passed since Sullivan's call went out. 3 weeks of frantic preparation. Status report, Sullivan's hologram said, her voice steady despite the approaching horror. Fleet formation complete, Jack replied from the weapons station. All 237 vessels in position. Unity support craft maintaining perimeter as ordered. Sullivan nodded. Dr. Powell. The response to your call exceeded all expectations, Sam said, gesturing to the crew around them. Over 10,000 individuals from 47 species showed genetic markers. Most didn't even know of their human ancestry. The bridge crew was a testament to this. Beings of all shapes and sizes, some looking nothing like traditional humans. Yet each had responded to Sullivan's signal, drawn by genetic memory they never knew they carried. The swarm is accelerating, reported Liz from the sensor array. Estimated contact in 30 minutes. Sullivan's hologram paced the command deck. Begin Phase 1. Deploy dimensional anchors. Outside, smaller vessels broke formation, moving to create a sphere around the advancing darkness. Each released a device that pulsed with blue energy, creating a network that shimmered between the stars. Anchors deployed, Jack confirmed. Field integrity at 92%. Admiral Wallace is hailing us, Liz said. Wallace appeared on screen, his flagship visible at the edge of the fleet. Captain Sullivan, my vessels are in position, but my weapons officers report our systems will be useless against the swarm. Your ships aren't here to fight. Admiral, Sullivan replied. They're here to evacuate our crews when the time comes. Wallace frowned. You never mentioned evacuation. Because I knew you wouldn't agree to the full plan, Sullivan said. The Prometheus Protocol requires sacrifices. Sam looked at her sharply. Captain. Sullivan's expression softened. I'm sorry, Dr. Powell. There was no other way. To create a dimensional collapse powerful enough to destroy the swarm completely, the fleet must detonate its cores from within the field. A suicide mission, Sam said, understanding washing over him. That's why you needed so many volunteers with the genetic markers. Only they could operate the dimensional fold systems, Sullivan confirmed. And only they would understand the necessity. Around the bridge, the crew continued working, their faces showing not surprise but grim acceptance. 20 minutes to contact, Liz reported, her voice steadied despite the revelation. Sullivan turned to address the bridge crew. Each of you carries the legacy of Earth, of humanity at its finest hour. 2,000 years ago, your ancestors faced this same enemy and chose to sacrifice everything to preserve life in this galaxy. Today, we honor their choice. No one spoke, but many nodded. Sam felt something stir within him, a memory that wasn't his own, yet somehow was. Begin Phase 2, Sullivan ordered. Power the dimensional fold cannons. The ancient ships hummed with energy as weapons designed millennia ago came to life. The darkness ahead seemed to recoil, sensing the threat. They recognized the technology, Sullivan observed. Good. They remember fear. The first attack came suddenly, a tendril of darkness stretching across space to wrap around one of the smaller vessels. The ship's shields flared with energy, then failed. In seconds, the vessel was pulled into the void. All ships, commence firing. Sullivan commanded. The fleet responded as one, beams of energy cutting through space, creating tears in reality where they struck the swarm. The creatures shrieked, not a sound but a feeling that penetrated the mind, making several crew members double over in pain. Keep firing, Sullivan shouted over the psychic assault. Drive them toward the center of the formation. For 10 minutes, the battle raged. Ancient vessels fell one after another, consumed by darkness or torn apart by forces beyond comprehension. Yet the fleet held its formation, gradually forcing the swarm into the center of their trap. Field integrity holding at 70%. Jack reported, blood trickling from his nose from the psychic backlash. The swarm is contained within the anchor points. Sullivan nodded, her holographic form flickering as the ship's systems diverted power to weapons. Begin final phase. Admiral Wallace, commence evacuation of non-essential personnel. And you, Captain? Wallace asked, concern evident in his voice. Sullivan smiled sadly. My consciousness is tied to this fleet. I go where it goes. She turned to Sam. Dr. Powell, you should join the evacuation. The evacuation vessels streaked away from the battle zone, carrying those crew members who had agreed to leave. From the command deck of Admiral Wallace's flagship, Liz watched the view screen with tears in her eyes. Behind her, representatives from every major galactic species stood in silence. Dimensional field at maximum strength, reported a Unity officer. The ancient fleet is completely enclosing the swarm. On screen, the human vessels formed a perfect sphere around the darkness, their hulls glowing with energy as their cores reached critical levels. At the center, the flagship maintained position, directing the final phase of the Prometheus Protocol. Inside that flagship, Sam stood beside Sullivan's hologram as alarms blared around them. The bridge crew, those who had chosen to remain, worked calmly at their stations despite the chaos. 90 seconds to core breach, Jack announced, his voice steady, field integrity holding at 65%. Sullivan's image flickered as power fluctuated throughout the ship. The swarm is fighting hard. They know what we're doing. Sam watched the tactical display, where the black mass of the swarm thrashed against its prison of light. They're afraid, he observed. They can feel fear. Yes, Sullivan agreed. They feared humanity once. That's why they attacked us first. All those centuries ago, they recognized the threat we posed. The ship shuddered as a swarm tendril struck the hull. Warning lights flashed across multiple systems. 60 seconds, Jack called out. Field integrity at 50%. Sullivan turned to Sam. There's still time for you to reach an escape pod. Sam shook his head. My place is here. I understand that now. He touched his temple. The memories are clearer. I think my ancestors served under you in the First War. Sullivan studied his face. Lieutenant Frank Powell, navigation specialist. He was brave too. Another impact rocked the ship. Several consoles exploded in showers of sparks. 30 seconds, Jack reported, blood now streaming from his ears as the swarm's psychic assault intensified. Field integrity holding at minimum required levels. Sullivan addressed the remaining crew. It has been my honor to serve with you all. Your ancestors would be proud. Around the bridge, the descendants of humanity stood at their posts, faces set with determination as they completed the mission started 2,000 years before. 15 seconds, Jack said. Core breach imminent. Sullivan turned to Sam one last time. Make sure they remember this time. No more hiding who we are. I promise, Sam replied, though he knew no one would hear his words. 5 seconds, Jack whispered. 4, 3. Sullivan's hologram stood tall, facing the view screen where the swarm raged against its fate. 2, 1. The world became light. From the safety of the Unity flagship, Liz shielded her eyes as the view screen automatically dimmed. Where the battle had raged moments before, a new star seemed to bloom in space, a perfect sphere of energy that pulsed once, twice, then collapsed in on itself with impossible speed. For a moment, silence reigned on the bridge. Then the sensor officer spoke in a voice filled with awe. The swarm, it's gone. Completely destroyed. No traces detected. Admiral Wallace stepped forward, his face solemn. And the fleet? The officer shook his head. No survivors, sir. Liz felt a hand on her shoulder and turned to find the Tellurian representative standing beside her, tears on her scaled face. They knew, the Tellurian said quietly. They all knew this was the only way. 6 months later, Liz stood before the newly commissioned memorial on Unity Prime. A massive sculpture of crystal and light depicted the ancient fleet's final stand. Below it, thousands of names were etched, not just those who died in the final battle, but all who had served in the original fleet 2 millennia before. Admiral Wallace joined her, now wearing the insignia of Supreme Commander. The Council has officially recognized humanity's contribution to galactic history, he said. All records have been corrected. And the technology? Liz asked. Being studied. The evacuation ships recovered enough data to understand the basics of quantum displacement theory. Wallace looked up at the memorial. We won't forget again. The new fleet will carry their legacy forward. As if in response, a squadron of ships passed overhead. New vessels built with the recovered technology, their hulls bearing the ancient insignia of Earth alongside the modern symbols of the Unity. They're calling it the Sullivan Initiative, Wallace continued, a program to identify all those with human ancestry, to help them understand their heritage.